My name is Erica, this is Anna, and this is Bailey and Will, and we're going to talk about the evolution of turtles from a reptilian tetrapod and the possible lineages of that are taxa to the turtles.
Turtles, physiologically, are one of the most unique tetrapods there are, and they are also one of the last major groups of animals that scientists have been able to determine where they fall phylogenetically. And there are currently two major theories as to where they fall. One is that they are the sister taxa of the Lepidosaurid clade, and the Lepidosaurid clade includes reptiles such as snakes and lizards. The other current major hypothesis is that they are the sister taxa of the Archosaur clade, and the archosaurs include reptiles such as crocodilians and birds. And in studying these hypotheses, there are three major forms of evidence that biologists look at. First of which is morphological evidence. They can compare the anatomies of living turtles and other living reptiles, and through similarities in their physical structures, they can try to determine exactly, well, not exactly, but they can try to determine what they are most related to. A third form of evidence is embryology, and in this, scientists look at the developing embryos of different reptiles, and as the embryos develop, early in their development, they can show similarities, and depending on just how similar they are, this can help reveal relatedness. And biologists also look at molecular evidence, such as similarities in DNA sequences, including both mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA.
And I'm just going to kind of, I'm not going to go into detail on like the Lepidosauurs or the Archosaurs, but I'm going to talk mainly about like the shell. So I'm like, way back when they all, even for like all of y'all's, the amniotes and the tetrapods, it was like where they diverged from, or their ancestors. And so then it like branches off, and then the shells form to be the turtle. And that's what the synapomorph for the turtles is, pretty much. It's the only major thing for turtles. And through the evolution of the shell, it started out with the Unitosaurus, which pretty much looks just like a lizard. This one actually I don't have a picture of that one, but it looks really similar to this one, only the rib region will be a little bit smaller and not as like prominent yet. And but that was 260 million years ago when that one was around. And then the Papachiles, which is this one right here, it's kind of like the Tiktaalik of the fish, like it's the transformation or transitional kind of fossil. The fossils they found of that one would be the support for that. And the ribs started to like broaden, the intercostal muscles started to kind of disappear. And so it still looked like a lizard because everything was internal still. And then the Odontochiles was just kind of a little bit more, everything was still inside internally, but it looked like a pregnant lizard kind of, with all the ribs widening and stuff. And then the Progantochiles, which is this one right here, I don't know if you can see it, but it kind of looks, when you see it, it looks kind of like a dinosaur or turtle, and it had like spikes on the shell, and that was when the plastron on the bottom of the shell started to fuse. And then the carapace was beginning to, well, it was there, but the bridge hasn't really formed yet, which connects them. And then the Progantochiles was the last one in the evolution of the shell. It was 210 million years ago, so it took about 50 million years for the shell to completely evolve. And it looked kind of like this, just a little bit more evolved of the shell. And then I was just going to give you a visual of it actually happening, because I'm a visual type person. So, okay, so this is kind of how it would be for the Unitosaurus, and there's one that came right before that, but I don't have anything about that, but the Milleretta. So I was a lizard, and then this one's going to be the Unitosaurus, and you can see how they're broadening, and it's all inside, it kind of looks pregnant. And then there'll be kind of the similar one, the plastron and the carapace are there, but they're all going to still be internal in this one. And then it starts to like morph together a little bit more to form the shell for that one. last one, it's just a full-on shell. And then from there, we would get our green, the sea turtles, the loggerhead turtles, and everything later on. But yeah, so that's that. And then with it actually going into the shell, with us, we have our scapula up here and then our hips. And then the ribs are like right here, but for the turtles, for it actually happening, the hips and like the scapula kind of like went inside, and the ribs like attached to the shell, so that's why like if the shell gets messed up, it like kills the turtle. But yeah, it was a really compact thing, and so, but like I guess the big question was why did they need the shell in the first place? So Erica's gonna kind of talk about why the shell.
So, reasons that this turtle shell could have evolved would have been for two selective pressures and also an event that occurred. So the two selective pressures would have been the necessity for protection, and also it would have been a reason for buoyancy. So when turtles are in the water, they're larger, like their shells in the underside,
The plastron.
the plastron is wide, so that width helps with buoyancy, so it helps to keep them afloat on the water. And also, if they're on the water and their eyes are up here, how are they going to see below them? How are they going to know what's coming for them? So another reason for that would have been the hardening of it and defending them from predators that could have preyed on them. And so we know that based on natural selection, those that are not fit for their environment because the way that they live and function may not help them to survive, will be the ones that don't have those good genes are going to end up dying, and the ones that have those genes that will help them survive and produce will allow them to survive and pass those genes on to their progeny, which will then multiply again, and that's how evolution occurs. So those are the two selective pressures. Another reason for this change could have been the Permian extinction, which during that time period also would have included Pangea splitting. So, and we know that the Permian extinction had killed a lot of marine life, and so we know that turtles are partially based in water and partially based on land. So another reason for this adaptation could have been the divergence and the convergent evolution and different things in their geographic location that could have impacted further differences in their shell.
All right, so I'm going to go into some of the specifics about the Lepidosauria phylogeny. So what we're talking about when we say Lepidosauria, it basically starts about right here where the split happens between the snakes, lizards, and Tuatara, which is another form of lizard, and the turtles. So this is where the split happens. And basically some of the phenotypic traits of the reptilian ancestors are they have scales, a tough epidermis, they have temporal holes in the reptilian skull structure, and there were changes in the body layout of the turtles, such as their neck, their legs, and their shell, which Savannah touched. So scientists have discovered the skull of a 240 million year old reptile ancestor that connects turtles to modern snakes. The hypotheses that exist about the embryology of the turtles don't display any concrete evidence that turtle ribs formed into a shell from a reptilian ancestor, but it would indicate a gradual change eventually. Also, while turtles are more closely related to birds during their embryological development, there is a higher similarity to snakes in adulthood, as well as their DNA expression and their molecular data. Fossil evidence suggests that there are several possible ancestors for the Lepidosauria phylogeny. One of them is Papacheles, which is this guy right here. Papacheles translates into grandfather turtle. So fossils of Papacheles show that the ribs change into a shell because they're so wide. Papacheles is also most closely connects turtles to the reptilian lineage of all of the common ancestors. So from nose to tail, Papacheles is about the size of a modern-day box turtle. It also appears to have semi-aquatic morphologies, such as webbed claws, that are similar to aquatic morphologies of the modern-day turtle. Perganocheles, which is this guy, doesn't have the ability to retract his head as most turtles do. And neither do modern sea turtles. So that suggests that land-dwelling turtles come from maybe a different ancestor species, and that sea turtles, modern day, are a direct descendant from Proganochelys. In China, there are fossils from 220 million years ago that show the formation of the turtle shells that support this fossil evidence. And also in Africa, there's fossils that date back to 260 million years ago that show evidence of the temporal holes forming in the skulls. So scientists are baffled by the existence of Proganochelys because there's no intermediary species between a reptile and Proganochelys. All of a sudden, there's this fossil that has a shell. So the evolutionary position of turtles with the amniote phylogeny has eluded evolutionary biologists because there are few other turtle morphologies that are connected to the other amniotes.
So now we're going to talk about the other hypothesis for the sister taxa to turtles, which would be that Archosaurs, also known as the bird crocodilian lineage, that those are the more closely related sister taxa to turtles. And so there's a few things for evidence, such as the fossils and the embryological data. But first, we're going to talk about the common ancestor between the bird and crocodiles. So during the Upper Permian and the Triassic period, which would be about 270 to 250 years ago, million years ago, sorry. Yeah, that'd be too soon. There was an ancestor, Unitosaurus africanus, which we touched on, that showed that that it was in the process of eliminating those temporal holes, the temporal fenestrae.
Yep.
And both snakes and birds are diapsids. They do have those. However, turtles evolved to be anapsids. They lost those. And so this Unitosaurus africanus shows the process of those going away or disappearing, is evolving to no longer have them. And so while this can point in the direction of either being more closely related to Archosaurs, it can also point to being closely related to Lepidosaurs. However, there is strong embryological data, which I'm going to talk about, that shows a very high correlation between development of these two lineages. So there was a study done between modern day birds, chickens, and soft-shelled turtles that tested the gene expression during embryology. And this is a really small thing, but it's the hourglass model, which, as we know, in hourglass, it's wide at the top and it narrows in the center and then it widens out the base. And so this model shows how during the later stages in embryology and during the earlier stages, they're not as similar. However, in the middle, they become very close. And when they were testing approximately 12,000 gene sequences for the RNA coding for them and the expression of them, they found that approximately between 95 and 96% of them were similar to the turtles. So the birds and the turtles during embryology are very similar. Also, the data for this, when they tested it using ANOVA, they found a p-value which tells you the statistical significance was 7.37 times 10 to the negative 7. So it was a very, very small number. And this experiment has been repeated multiple times, testing multiple gene sequences to target and find out which ones are really close between the turtles and the birds. And they have found that there is a very strong correlation between these two clades. Also, part of the hourglass model that we have here is there's a wider hourglass and then there's a narrow hourglass. And so the wider one shows the vertebrates in general, how closely related they are and how they become similar in the middle, but you can compare, if you want to narrow your search down, you can compare it. And so within this model right here, we have a very much more narrow arrow glass within that one that shows that they're even closer, that these two specifically, the archosaurs and the turtles, are very close. And yes, so the embryological data is very strong for the archosaur lineage that would be sister taxa to turtles, and they also have fossil evidence that points in potentially both directions. Oh, sorry. Do you want to talk about the other lineage? Okay. There's also. Yeah, go for it. Sorry. There was also another potential lineage that has been kind of pushed to the side in recent years due to increasing data for these two, but it stated that potentially these turtles were also a whole branch off on their own, because since they're so morphologically different, since they have this turtle shell that is not similar to any other species, it causes to question, well, how did this evolve, and is it really that closely related to these other ones when no other species exhibit those qualities? There was also another piece of evidence showed a specific gene for olfactory genes, which is the sense of smell. That in turtles they mutated very rapidly, and so that also caused the question, if this gene mutated rapidly and it's not similar in any way to the chickens or like to the birds or the snakes, then is it related to that too? So there's these three lineages, but in recent years these two are the strong ones that have caused a debate. There's a lot of evidence for both of them, and so in our conclusion, there isn't really a decision which one is closer to turtles, because there's evidence saying that archosaurs are more closely related, but there's also evidence that is saying that lepidosaurs are more closely related. So far there cannot be a concrete conclusion drawn about that, and potentially ways to improve or to maybe make a better decision on that would be if there were more intermediate ancestors between these that possibly shed some light on the missing pieces of the puzzle.
Questions?
I know you said like you can't really decide which one they like started off from, but since you guys do all the research and like you guys have seen both sides, is there one that you guys are more leaning towards? Like, I know like this is more like a personal question,
Yeah.
but I just didn't know if there was one since you guys have done all the research.
This is a really strong study, so.
Yeah, I think that based on what we were researching and we were going through general data about these two lineages and primary articles, there were many more experiments and much more research done for the birds, for the bird Carpezonian lineage, the archosaurs. So currently it seems like that, I don't know if that's necessarily researched more or if there is necessarily more evidence, but it seems like that's potentially what they're leaning towards. But they haven't, everyone's all over the place in this debate because there's still experiments with both of them that point in both directions.
Other questions? Are there any hypotheses about why the ribs got that shape, this flattened shape? I mean, it didn't turn into a protective shell right away, so what would have been the reason?
I think it's because of the buoyancy in the water,
Okay.
and how it's similar to boats in that it'll help
Okay,
turtles float.
so the first ones were water, and then later turtles moved back onto the land. Okay.
And so the ones that had that feature where the ribs may have been wider would have been favored. So
Okay.
then over time they kept
So it
broadening
wasn't at
out.
first for protection, but maybe later.
Yeah.
it was. Okay, thank you.